The Breaking Point ambassador Sarah Chen stood before the Galactic Assembly for what she knew would be the final time. The massive chamber stretched upward into darkness, filled with thousands of representatives from hundreds of worlds. Yet despite humanity's 50 years of membership, their designated section remained tucked away in the upper tiers, barely visible from the main floor where the elder races conducted their real business. Sarah adjusted her translator and began speaking in measured tones that carried across the vast space. The Zentari delegation continued their private discussion, their crystalline forms pulsing with colors that indicated they found something amusing. The Korvax representatives didn't even pretend to pay attention. Their mechanical bodies turned away as they reviewed data streams. Only a handful of minor species seemed to notice that Earth's ambassador had taken the floor. For 5 decades, humanity had tried everything to earn respect in this chamber. They had shared their music only to be told it was too chaotic and emotional. They had offered their medical advances, only to have them dismissed as primitive compared to Zentari healing crystals that most species couldn't even use. They had proposed new trade routes through human space that would benefit everyone, only to watch the Council award those same routes to the Korvax Collective, who had simply repackaged humanity's proposal with minor changes. Sarah remembered her predecessor, Ambassador James Wu, who had spent 20 years trying to get the Assembly to consider humanity's unified field theory that could revolutionize faster-than-light travel. The Theoretical Sciences Committee had reviewed it for exactly 12 minutes before declaring it incompatible with established galactic principles. 3 months later, the Altarians presented nearly the same theory with different mathematical notation and received the prize of distinguished achievement. The breaking point had come last week when the colony ship Endeavour, carrying 10,000 human families to a new world humanity had surveyed and claimed according to all galactic law, was turned away. The Council had decided that the Mech Empire needed that system more, despite the Mech having shown no interest in it until humans had spent years preparing it for colonization. The vote had been 847 to 3, with only the Volpari and 2 other minor species supporting humanity's legitimate claim. Sarah's voice grew stronger as she continued her speech. Though she knew most weren't listening, she spoke of humanity's contributions that had been overlooked, minimized, or simply stolen. She reminded them of the 17 conflicts humanity had helped resolve through patient diplomacy, though the credit always went to whatever elder race had been nominally in charge. She listed the technologies humanity had developed only to see them attributed to others, the colonies they had established only to have them redistributed, the dreams they had brought to the stars only to have them crushed by bureaucracy and prejudice. Behind her, the rest of Earth's delegation sat in perfect formation. They had all voted unanimously for what came next. Every human colony, every ship captain, every citizen on Earth and beyond had cast their vote in the first truly unified decision in human history. The result had been 99.7% in favor, with the remaining fraction abstaining rather than opposing. Sarah reached the crescendo of her speech. She announced that effective immediately, humanity was withdrawing from the Galactic Council, the Trade Confederation, the Defense Alliance, and all associated organizations. The human race would return to their own space, close their borders, and cease all interaction with the galactic community that had made it abundantly clear they were not wanted. For the first time in her speech, the chamber fell silent. Even the Zentari stopped their chittering. The Korvax turned their sensors toward the human section. High Counselor Thekval of the Altarians rose from his seat, his 6 arms spreading in what might have been surprise or dismissal. The High Counselor's response was exactly what Sarah had expected. He expressed mild disappointment that humanity would choose isolation over continued cooperation. He reminded the Assembly that humanity was free to leave if they wished, though they would forfeit all benefits of galactic civilization. He suggested that perhaps some time apart would help humanity mature enough to appreciate what the Council offered. Sarah didn't respond. She simply turned and walked out, followed by her entire delegation. As they left, she heard Thekval already moving on to the next agenda item, something about mining rights in the Sagittarius Arm. By the time the humans reached their ships, the Assembly had returned to business as usual, confident that humanity would come crawling back within a year, maybe 2 at most. They had no idea what they had just lost. The withdrawal was remarkably orderly. Human ships returned to Earth space from across the galaxy, bringing with them everyone who chose to come home. The colonies that fell within humanity's original borders, the ones the Council had graciously allowed them to keep, were reinforced and expanded. The jump gates that connected human space to the galactic network were politely but firmly closed. Trade agreements were dissolved with proper notice. Military assets were recalled from joint operations. Within a month, humanity had vanished from galactic affairs as completely as if they had never emerged from their small blue world at all. No complaints were filed. No protests were lodged. No threats were made. Humanity simply withdrew and fell silent. At first, the silence was barely noticed. The Zentari made jokes about the emotional humans sulking in their corner of space. The Korvax calculated that the loss of humanity's minimal trade contributions would affect galactic GDP by less than 0.003%. The Altarians congratulated themselves on handling the situation with such diplomatic grace. But senior trade analyst Yorth of the Volpari noticed something odd in the second week. The small stabilizer components that humanity had been supplying, the ones everyone said could be easily replaced by superior Korvax alternatives, were suddenly in short supply. It turned out the Korvax versions were superior in performance but took 6 times longer to manufacture and cost 4 times as much. A minor inconvenience, surely, but several shipments were delayed. By the third week, the head of the Galactic Medical Foundation, Dr. Sekli of the Zentari, faced an uncomfortable reality. The human medical volunteers who had staffed nearly a third of the frontier clinics were gone. The Zentari healing crystals were indeed superior, but they required Zentari operators who had no interest in serving on backward frontier worlds. Several colonies reported disease, outbreaks that would have been routine to handle a month ago but now threatened to become epidemics. The fourth week brought a discovery that Commander Grex of the Mech Empire tried desperately to keep secret. The navigation algorithms that humanity had contributed to the galactic standard, the ones that had been dismissed as unnecessarily complex, had somehow been keeping the entire network stable. Without constant updates from Earth's quantum computers, small errors were accumulating. Ships were arriving hours, then days off schedule. 2 vessels had already been lost in hyperspace, their crews presumably alive but unreachable. By the 6th week, High Counselor Thekval called an emergency meeting of the Inner Council. The seemingly minor inconveniences were cascading into serious problems. The Korvax Collective admitted their manufacturing facilities were struggling. Without the rare Earth elements humanity had been mining from asteroids using techniques no one had bothered to learn. The Altarian universities reported that nearly 200 collaborative research projects had stalled without their human partners, who it turned out had been doing most of the actual work while the Altarians had been taking the credit. The Inner Council decided to send a diplomatic envoy to Earth to graciously offer humanity a chance to return with full membership restored. Surely the humans had learned their lesson by now. Surely they understood how much they needed the galactic community. The envoy's ship arrived at the former location of the primary human jump gate to find empty space. Deep scans revealed the gate hadn't been destroyed, but had somehow been moved. The backup gates were similarly absent. Every known entry point to human space had been relocated or hidden. The borders weren't just closed. They had effectively vanished. The Awakening. 3 months after humanity's withdrawal, the Galactic Council faced its first genuine crisis in over 1,000 years. It started with something seemingly trivial, a software update. The integrated systems that managed everything from life support to traffic control across 10,000 worlds needed routine maintenance. For 50 years, a small team of human programmers had handled these updates, working quietly in the background, never asking for recognition or additional compensation. Nobody had thought to ask them to document their work before they left. The Korvax Collective, as the most technologically advanced member of the Council, volunteered to reverse engineer the system. Their best minds spent weeks analyzing the code only to discover layer upon layer of interconnected patches, fixes, and improvements that humanity had implemented over the decades. What appeared to be a simple maintenance task was actually a complex web of solutions preventing catastrophic failures across incompatible alien technologies. The first major failure occurred on Zentar Prime, a power grid fluctuation that should have been contained to a single district cascaded through the entire northern continent. The humans had installed fail-safes that nobody had noticed because they had never been triggered. Without those fail-safes, 14 million Zentari spent 3 days in darkness before power could be restored. The economic damage was counted in billions of galactic credits. Ambassador Kresh of the Volpari stood before an emergency session of the full assembly. Her species had maintained limited contact with humanity until the very end, and she had warned the Council repeatedly that they were underestimating Earth's contributions. Now, as she presented her report, even she was surprised by the full scope of what they had lost. Humanity hadn't just been participants in galactic civilization, they had been its invisible foundation. While the elder races had been concerned with prestige and politics, humans had been solving problems. While the great powers had been claiming credit for achievements, humans had been doing the work. They had been the nurses in the hospitals, the engineers maintaining the infrastructure, the teachers in the frontier schools, the negotiators preventing conflicts from escalating. But more than that, humanity had been the innovators. They had been finding solutions to problems other species didn't even recognize as problems. The traffic control system that prevented collisions between ships from different technological backgrounds, human-designed. The universal translation protocols that allowed species with completely different concepts of language to communicate, human-programmed. The agricultural techniques that allowed colonies to become self-sufficient, regardless of their home species' biological needs, human-developed. The Altarian delegation demanded to know why these contributions hadn't been recognized. The answer, when it came, was as simple as it was shameful. The humans had never demanded recognition. They had simply done what needed to be done and moved on to the next problem. In a society where status was everything, a species that didn't fight for credit was assumed to have done nothing worth crediting. High Counselor Tekval authorized an unprecedented intelligence-gathering mission to discover what humanity was doing behind their closed borders. The stealth ships sent to investigate never returned. They weren't destroyed or captured. They simply stopped transmitting the moment they crossed into human space. When their crews eventually made it back to Council space weeks later in cramped escape pods, they reported that their ship's systems had been peacefully but completely disabled by technologies they couldn't understand or counter. The economic collapse accelerated in month 4. Trade routes that had run smoothly for centuries became exercises in frustration. Without human troubleshooters identifying and solving bottlenecks before they became critical, small delays multiplied into massive backlogs. The Mech Empire, which had taken the colony world originally claimed by humanity, discovered that the terraforming equipment left behind had been specifically calibrated by human technicians. Without their expertise, the atmosphere processors failed one by one, forcing an expensive evacuation of the 30,000 mech colonists who had moved there. By month 5, desperation was setting in. The Council offered humanity extraordinary terms to return: permanent seats on the Inner Council, exclusive trade rights, recognition of all their previous contributions, even reparations for past injustices. The messages sent to Earth went unanswered. Not rejected, not acknowledged, simply ignored as if the vast galactic community didn't exist. It was the Volpari who finally managed to make contact, not through official channels but through a single human trader who had chosen to remain in galactic space. Marcus Webb was one of only a few dozen humans who hadn't returned to Earth, mostly those with families from other species. He agreed to carry a message back to human space, warning that he couldn't guarantee a response. 3 weeks later, he returned with an answer that shocked the assembly. Humanity wasn't suffering in isolation. They were thriving, free from galactic restrictions and bureaucracy. They had unleashed their full innovative potential. Technologies that the Council had deemed impossible or dangerous were now commonplace in human space. They had developed new forms of faster-than-light travel that didn't rely on jump gates. They had created artificial intelligences that surpassed Korvax computing systems. They had begun terraforming worlds that the Council had declared permanently uninhabitable. The message from Earth's new government was polite but firm. Humanity appreciated the Council's belated recognition but had moved on. They were building their own future, one that didn't require approval from species who had never understood or valued what humanity offered. They wished the galactic community well but had no interest in rejoining it. For the first time in its history, The Galactic Council faced the possibility that it needed another species more than that species needed it. The elder races had always assumed that younger civilizations would inevitably seek their approval and guidance. The idea that humanity could simply walk away and succeed on their own challenged everything they believed about their own superiority. As month 6 ended, secret negotiations began. Not the public grandstanding of the assembly, but quiet, desperate attempts to find some way to convince humanity to share their innovations. The Zentari offered their most precious healing crystals. The Korvax promised to share their most advanced technologies. The Altarians even offered to acknowledge publicly that humanity had been the true source of dozens of innovations they had claimed. The response from Earth was consistent. Humanity would trade with individual species who approached them as equals, but they would never again subordinate themselves to the Council's authority. They had learned that respect couldn't be earned from those who were determined not to give it. They had stopped seeking validation from those who would never validate them. They had discovered that the greatest freedom was not caring whether others recognized your worth, as long as you recognized it yourself. Some species chose to swallow their pride and establish bilateral relations with humanity. They found the humans surprisingly welcoming, eager to trade and share knowledge with those who treated them as partners rather than subordinates. The Volpari were the first, followed by several other minor species who had also felt marginalized by the Council hierarchy. But the great powers of the Council struggled to accept this new reality. They had defined themselves by their superiority over younger races. To approach humanity as equals would be to admit that their entire social structure was built on arrogance rather than merit. Many chose to continue struggling rather than abandon their prejudices. A year after humanity's withdrawal, the galaxy had fundamentally changed. The Galactic Council still existed, but its power was broken. Several member species had left to join what was being called the Free Trade Network, centered around humanity's revolutionary technologies and egalitarian principles. The rigid hierarchy that had defined galactic civilization for millennia was crumbling. In her final report to the reduced assembly, Ambassador Kresh of the Volpari delivered a truth that few wanted to hear, but all needed to understand. The Council hadn't lost humanity because Earth had walked away. They had lost humanity long before that. The moment they had decided that being different meant being inferior, that contributing quietly meant not contributing at all, that needing guidance was the same as having nothing to teach. Humanity's withdrawal hadn't been an act of anger or revenge. It had been an act of self-respect. They had simply stopped waiting for recognition that was never going to come, and started building a future where their contributions were valued, even if they were the only ones doing the valuing. The universe had ignored humanity until they walked away. But by then, humanity had learned they didn't need the universe's attention. They had each other, and that was enough. The galaxy's loss was not that humanity had left, but that it had taken so long to realize what it had thrown away. As Earth's colonies flourished and their technologies advanced beyond anything the Council had imagined possible, a new phrase began to spread through human space, adopted from an old Earth saying, "The best revenge is massive success." Humanity wasn't trying to prove anything to the galaxy anymore. They were too busy proving everything to themselves.